So, everything in the UK has gotten really expensive as of late. I'm sure you noticed if you live in this bemoaned island that your paycheck is not going nearly as far as you like, that you're probably quite cold and you're probably quite hungry compared to how you were, we'll say, about 3 years ago. If we look at this particular piece in the Telegraph, they found that food is to overtake energy bills as the main driver of inflation. And bear in mind, the UK has the highest energy bills in Europe at this point, so pretty drastic stuff. Families are facing a £1,000 increase in their annual shopping bills. That's 16 million households, 56% of all UK families, will face greater food than energy price inflation from this summer, according to cross-party think tank The Resolution Foundation. Food prices have jumped by a fifth in the year to March 2023, marking the biggest leap in 45 years. So that's pretty significant from post-war rationing, even. The Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey has said the rapidly rising food prices are now the biggest cause of Britain's persistently high inflation rate, other than the Bank of England itself, but then if he said that, he'd put himself out of a job. But we'll get onto their mismanagement very shortly. So, Stelios, if you were a Conservative Prime Minister or a Chancellor, what would you do to bring down inflation? Any ideas?
I have plenty of ideas. I don't know if I could bring forward my plan now. I would not be at liberty to disclose that information.
What would price controls be among those ideas?
I don't think so.
No. Well, unfortunately, they're the idea.
Usually they have the opposite effect.
Yeah. You know, like in Turkey, where Erdogan put them in and he had police officers going around supermarkets checking the price of biscuits with a clipboard, and that resulted in 80% inflation. And then Erdogan knew that was so bad that he just stopped reporting on inflation. He made it illegal. So Rishi Sunak thought that's a great idea. He's actually proposed price controls. We live in the Soviet satellite state known as the United Kingdom now. Das Vidania, comrades. Anyway, let's go on to this next one. They actually stole the idea from the Lib Dems. You remember when Michael Gove said that there would be no Conservative more at home in the Liberal Democrat Party? Obviously, forgetting to refer to himself and the Prime Minister and the entire cabinet. So this is Ed Davey. I refuse to call him Sir Ed Davey because I wish that, well, shame the Queen didn't bring down the sword a little bit harder. Anyway, so he has called on the Competition and Markets Authority to investigate whether any profiteering was taking place among supermarkets and food multinationals. So you can see here the smokescreen that's already been set up. It's that those evil capitalists are exploiting the inflation crisis that we definitely didn't cause by raising their food prices to hurt the poor workers. Okay. Very good psyop there. Hasn't quite worked. Now, there is an argument perhaps that supermarkets are raising their prices and then rolling them back through discount schemes like the Tesco Club card or the Nectar card to incentivize people shopping there. But that's not the main cause of inflation. And we're going to be going over exactly why shortly. But
yeah, I don't want to anticipate.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's just usually these things are caused by government policy and not just money-grubbing capitalists behind the scenes. Analysis by the Lib Dems showed the typical cost of a weekly shop has now risen by £12 or £604 in the space of a year. And obviously that was about a month ago. That was the 2nd of May, so less than 30 days. And it's already projected to go up by an extra £400 by the summer. Last week, Sainsbury's announced profits of £690 million for the year to the 4th of March. And Tesco recorded profits of £753 million last year, half the level of a year earlier when we were coming out of lockdown and lots of people were just buying food to go and make bread because you had nothing else to do when you were sitting at home. Point being, I don't begrudge the supermarkets for making profits, mainly because just looking at the numbers is not a multi-factor analysis. How about the record levels of migration that you've been doing every year? So net intake of 500, 600,000 people going up to 1 million. Do you think those people might buy food?
Well, yeah, presumably. When you have more money chasing, the same amount of goods,
yes,
price of goods goes up.
Exactly. And if you have more people with more money chasing the same amount of goods, then more money is changing hands, ergo more profits for the supermarkets.
I must say I'm very frustrated when people they use the economic data of the last 2 years to talk about against free market economics, whereas most of the ills we are faced with nowadays are caused by bad government interventions.
Yeah, command economy.
I mean, that's a secondary topic to discuss. But the thing is that they are caused by governmental intervention.
Yeah, and it's not just the government as well, because every party, including the Lib Dems and Labour, backed lockdown and money printing. So Ed Davey is equally as culpable here, but he's given the government the talking point to try and wiggle their way out of terrible monetary policy.
When in doubt, print money.
Thank you, Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
Anyway, on to the next one. So this is Sunak now picking it up and running with it. This was a Telegraph exclusive. So Downing Street is drawing up plans for retailers to introduce price caps on basic food items such as bread and milk. Now, these are meant to be voluntary. Oh, do me a favour. How? It's an oxymoron to say a voluntary price cap, because if there's no enforcement mechanism, then it's just going to go up whenever they need to raise it. So, of course, it's behavioural nudge theory. They're going to suggest it as voluntary, then they're going to make it mandatory, and then how a price cap works is it doesn't become the maximum, it becomes the new minimum. So everyone just raises their prices to the government set standard, and when the goods stay static but the inflation gets even worse, they adjust the price cap. So rather than a gradual increase in price, which allows people to budget, earn, save more to keep pace with the rate of inflation, it jumps up overnight and impoverishes people. It's a stupid idea that's never worked where it's been implemented. But that won't stop the Conservative Party for chasing communism.
It shows a lot, though, that they just care about the next elections.
Yes.
And they don't care about this phenomenon long term. They just care about putting forward a policy that sounds good now.
Yeah,
short.
We've gone from a just-in-time economy to just-in-time policy making because they are browning their pants about a year out of the election. And they know that they have really screwed up and lost lots of people. But this is also the problem. In our Halo Reach match politics paradigm at the moment, what's going to happen is about 6 in 10 people that voted for Boris and thought they were going to get lower immigration and lower costs and then got locked down and record immigration instead aren't going to vote. And then the rest of them are just going to bring up the pause menu and switch from blue team to red team, even though Labour and Conservatives are indistinguishable. You know, there's a roller paper between the two in terms of their policy. Rishi Sunak's aides have started work on a deal with supermarkets akin to an agreement in France in which the country's major retailers charge the lowest possible amount for some essential food products. The move would amount to the biggest attempt to manage supermarket prices since controls established by Edward Heath in 1973, which then lost him the election to Labour. History repeats itself again and again and again. Number 10 insists that any action taken by retailers would be voluntary. But here's what isn't voluntary. The Telegraph can also disclose that continued inflation and increases in gilt yields are throwing into doubt Mr. Sunak's aspiration to cut personal taxes before the next election. 10-year gilt yields are 4.33%, having peaked at 4.5% following Liz Truss's mini-budget. Now, that's not quite true because that happened the week before Liz Truss announced the budget. The bond market was on the precipice of collapse. I've already spoken to Dan about this and he has confirmed this in his analysis. And so Liz Truss's mini-budget was actually a convenient scapegoat for bad Bank of England policy. They just coincided because really, a 1% tax cut crashed the entire economy? No, there was mismanagement long before that. But the point is here is that Sunak is saying it's a choice for supermarkets to cap their prices. But what isn't the choice is that they're going to tax you even more at a time of record inflation and break their promises to lower taxes ahead of the next election, which would have been an election-winning platform for them. So you're right, they're scrambling last minute for any ideas. And it's a farce to think that any of this is voluntary because your paycheck has been plundered, which you never voted for. It's a joke.
Inflation on its own is a form of indirect tax.
Yes, that's one of the best ways to conceptualize it.
It robs you of the real value of money.
Yeah, it depreciates your purchasing power. So you wake up one morning and your savings are worth half of what they used to. That's why we can't get a house. Thanks, government. One source told the Telegraph it's very easy to point the finger at retailers and say they're making a fortune, but some of the margins they're operating at are not that big. It's quite tight. So, yeah, we're getting the raw profit numbers, but what isn't being reported alongside that are their operating costs. So I can only imagine, especially with the price of energy, which is also driving up food inflation because it has to be grown and transported with fertilizer and fuel, that it's going to be really difficult to even run these warehouses, these supermarkets, pay all the workers that are trying to distribute to an increasing amount of people that aren't even on the books as well. Dan looked at the food metrics and estimated that there's upwards of 90 million people in the UK. There's loads of people that are just not reported themselves living here. And so that's factoring in. And again, that's a consequence of government policy, but it's just not being recognised because it looks too bad for them ahead of an election. Britain has the joint highest rate of inflation among the G7 alongside Italy. And obviously Germany's just about to go into recession, or technically has. So it's not Brexit causing this, just to preempt the BBC's talking points and The Guardian, but I repeat myself. If we go on to the next one, Sunak's already been warned that it's going to create food shortages. Almost like that might be the plan, but I wouldn't want to be a conspiracy theorist. Tesco, Sainsbury's, Morrison's and Waitrose have all backed a statement by the British Retail Consortium, saying that the plan, first revealed in the Telegraph, will not make a jot of difference to prices and accuse Mr Sunak of recreating 1970s-style price controls. So it looks like that backroom deal, voluntary, with supermarkets isn't really going anywhere because they've said, No thanks. One retail boss said it's a harebrained idea, and instead of trying to intervene in supermarket pricing, the government would be better advised to address the root causes of inflation. Now, this is quite interesting. If you scroll down, John, there's a graph somewhere in this. Here we go. If you look at this, for our audio listeners, it's the CPI index and rate of inflation for food for the UK, Europe, and the US. And if you look, the US has subsequently dipped midway through 2022. And that's because the US obviously makes a lot more of their food from home. Now, US food is a questionable thing. It's filled with all sorts of additives and inflammatories, and that's why their obesity rate and their healthcare outcomes are a lot worse. But at least when a disaster would happen, they'd be insulated from the global markets a lot more than the UK and Europe, which are more reliant on exports from places like Ukraine, for example. And so the issue you have here is the UK have bogged down its farmers with all sorts of DEFRA regulation. DEFRA for the Department for Land, Agriculture, Rural Affairs, all that sort of stuff, are more interested in putting down innocent alpacas that haven't got tuberculosis, RIP Geronimo, than actually lifting lots of the regulation that's stopping farmers from producing their goods, as we saw in Clarkson's farm. So it's very cumbersome, it's very bureaucratic, and very, very expensive. And then in the meantime as well, they're also paying farmers to not to produce, to keep prices relatively adjust, and they're paying them to retire. So we're sabotaging our own farming industry. And as Callum's brought up plenty of times, the who will pick the crops, who will go out and pick the potatoes, migrant seasonal workers, we've gotten addicted to this influx of low-wage people, rather than paying and investing in technological innovation that can harvest more of the food more accurately and get it out to more people. But of course, again, that would be reliant on low fuel prices, and they've sabotaged our fuel supply. So all government policy has just been designed to immiserate us at this point. There's no other way of reading it, frankly. It could also be, as I've said, behavioural nudge policy, and it says in this article, an industry source warned shelves of basic goods could be emptied by the policy, worsening the egg shortage caused by high energy prices and avian flu measures. So the avian flu measures have quarantined the chickens, which stopped them producing. Then there was a problem with chicken feed, where some farmers had switched their feed and chickens were able to produce more eggs, so there was something bad going on there. There are a bunch of food processing plants that caught fire, which caused a delay in supply chains, and of course, again, the cost of fuel. So all of these policies seem to be coalescing to reduce us eating certain types of food. I call to mind the WEF's predictions for 2030s, where you will eat less meat, but again, wouldn't want to be a conspiracy theorist. This is a quote. If they can't get fair prices for their products, farmers could just stop producing, which is what's already happened with eggs, or they could switch production into something they could get a fair price for, which is not subject to a price cap. What are they not going to subject things to price caps with? I would suggest all of the vegan meals which sit rotting on the shelves because nobody wants to buy them. Again, more behavioural nudge. Eat the bugs, eat the bean burger, live in the pod, you will own nothing and you will be happy.
I want to ask you something.
Please
because
do.
It seems to me that, those who are in favor of this way of operating, they are in favor of a top-down implementation of particular economic policy.
Managerialist.
Yes. And it seems to me that the farmers in general, they are being assaulted in a way by these policies. And I think it has to do with, I know I may be wrong, but I have the impression that there is a tendency to say that, this and this and that place over here, you're going to be the farmers, and we are going to, and the other places, they're going to do other things.
As in the rural-urban divide, or?
Not necessarily rural. The rural and urban divide works usually within a country. Mm. But when we have, for instance, coalitions of nation states like the EU, there may be the agenda, for instance, say, these nations are going to be the farmer nations.
There'll be producers, there'll be consumers.
Yes. Other nations, you're going to be you're going to live from tourism.
Yes. And
all of that is, just centrally planned. And also, I don't think it's... I did a segment some time ago about Germany closing down its nuclear reactors.
Yep, disastrous.
I don't understand why they're doing it. But in the meantime, you have France multiplying its current nuclear reactors.
Yeah, and
I think this has to do
exporters.
with the top-down implementation of a particular policy that disseminates. It makes a sort of division of labor within the union. And I think that right now planners are thinking in this way.
I wonder if it's because they want to engender a sort of mutual material reliance that will keep the EU together despite ideological conflicts.
Yes, and this does not have to work only within the EU. So, for
Yep.
instance, I think Merkel's policy was disastrous for Germany
Yes.
because she based 100% of her energy on a foreign state that wasn't a member of the EU. But it seems to me that right now we have many politicians who don't think of their national interests.
Yeah.
They think that it's, we for some reason we are beyond that, and they are making trade-offs.
Yeah, they believe in the golden arches theory that
Yeah.
mutual assured trade will always supersede conflicts of national sovereignty or
Yes.
ideology.
Yes.
And that's why they think delusionally they can make a trading partner out of the Chinese despite their egregious rights violations and their campaign of tyranny, and the fact that they're a foreign adversary set on deflating their currency, stealing our intellectual property and subverting us. And so what would be more sensible is to insulate our economies with food and energy manufacturing, particularly because those are the things that see you through a
Exactly,
crisis.
yeah.
But unfortunately no politician seems to be interested in that.
Yes.
Frustrating stuff.
It is seen as being anti-integration.
Yeah. Well, actually, let's go on to the energy point, because around the same time, so if we could, this was from 2018. This was an example Theresa May was criticised for because she brought in the energy price cap, and they had the same thing. Again, they keep jumping up in large increments. And now, bear in mind as well, inflation has been reported to have gone down recently, and we'll talk about those metrics later. But it's because they've removed energy prices from the inflation calculation where it was last year, and they've only done that because now the government is fixing a subsidy to it, which you're paying for out of your taxes, which have been increased anyway. So you're still paying more for it. The inflation metric as a rate of change metric looks lower comparatively, but it's only because they've been fudging the numbers. And this has all started again because Theresa May put price caps on energy, making it way more expensive. Instead of being the maximum that could be charged, in this article explains, it immediately became the minimum, irrespective of the quality and relevance. And they use university degrees here as a great example of the degree course or of the caliber of the institution providing it. So obviously, as I've already said, price caps instigate an arms race between the suppliers and the regulators to accurately set the price, but because of the way that information moves through complex knowledge systems, it's better that the market sets the price, because no commissar can ever keep pace with the real-time supply of goods and the real-time market demand. And the reason universities are a great example, and I'm sure that you'll agree, having spent lots of time actually teaching in a university. Humanities degrees, great example. You did philosophy, I did English literature. You have less contact hours. Your reading materials are central to the library, but you don't have any lab time. You don't have any equipment necessary. But you're still paying as an undergraduate the same rate that a biomedical sciences graduate would have, with more hours, more lab time, more facilities, more university costs, and better graduate outcomes for the average student. And we already have a price-adjusted form of paying for degrees with the masters and the PhD, so there's no excuse. But instead they set a standardized price for all undergraduate degrees to increase university uptake, and now you've got loads of resentful humanities students who can't get a job but are saddled with loads of debt, and you're wondering why they're screaming at the sky for socialism. Thank you, David Cameron. Really appreciate that one.
Yeah, but they're being brainwashed in doing this, because the thing is, I think it fits with what you're saying here and what we were saying before about the economy. The way I think of it is like that. I'm thinking of Hayek, for instance.
Yeah.
He's making the knowledge argument for more free market economics. It goes like this, that when you have a freer economy, you have more economic experiments.
Yes.
And a decreased level of risk per economic experiment. The more centralized you get, the fewer economic experiments you have, and the more the chances of that economic experiment failing increase.
Yeah,
So
and
for
if
instance, you had the 5-year plan. That's
Yeah.
one economic experiment. If it fails, everything fails.
Exactly.
And now it seems that we are close to having a planned economy. We're moving that way really fast.
If you put all of your eggs in one basket and some of them break, then all of the errors and all of the fallout inherent to that faulty plan has a wider scope of impact versus one startup just failing. And that's why you need a disseminated economy, and that's why you need to incentivize innovation rather than having this, which we are all suffering for at the moment, hence high taxes, hence high spending, hence high inflation. And speaking of, again, the UK, if we go to the next one, has the highest energy prices in Europe. Now, that's a little bit deceptive because it would have been Germany. However, Germany had a very fortunate summer, and they had record amounts of imports to make up for the shortfall in oil and gas they were getting from Nord Stream before the Americans conveniently decided to blow it up. And so this year, Germany will probably outpace us pretty terribly, but at the moment, the UK has mismanaged its economy so bad that we actually make Germany look slightly good. So I love living here. And so the incumbent Labour government, who are pretty much guaranteed to get in at this point, have decided to block all new North Sea oil and gas developments. Yeah, that's my face as well, Stelios. Just sheer... Well, not confusing. It's obviously sabotage, because Keir Starmer did say he prefers Davos to Westminster, so he is in the pocket of the World Economic Forum, and he is utterly obsessed with the green agenda and immiserating us and making us all contingent on renewables, which can be rationed and controlled according to if we do things that the government likes. And they've already drafted legislation to do that with electric cars, for example. I've written on this before. So Keir Starmer will announce plans to block all North Sea oil and gas developments and limit borrowing to green investment only as part of a radical new blueprint to make Britain a clean energy superpower. Currently, the UK meets about 45% of its gas needs from domestic energy generation. We could do much more. So, by the way, if anyone doesn't know, if we tapped 10% of the North Sea reserves, we'd have 50 years worth of energy independence. So if we did even more of that, we'd be able to export it. And I think there's a legal agreement which means that we can't actually nationalise production and keep it for ourselves / sell it, but just tear up the legal agreement at this point. Like, why are we allowing the Norwegians to tap it and they have a very prosperous country, but we can't do it for ourselves? Why are we subjecting ourselves to the global gas markets when other nations aren't playing by the rules? Again, I can only assume the politicians want to sabotage us. Despite the continued rise in renewables, 85% of British homes still rely on gas boilers for heat, and 42% of the UK's electricity comes from gas. Without new licences being approved, experts predict that the domestic oil and gas production could fall by as much as 15% per year by the turn of the decade. If so, output in 10 years would be about 80% lower than it is now, which is suicidal. Because again, just to remind you, this is research that I did about 2 years ago now, so this was pre-inflation as well. To create a fully renewable Britain would cost £2.9 trillion. It would take the year's worth of battery production, most of which is owned by the Chinese, upwards of 80%, from now until 2031 to be entirely redirected to the UK. That means no electric cars, that means no iPhones, anything for any other country. And even then, it would meet 26.5% of energy demands without any protection from 21-day blackouts. That's a stupid idea, let's not do that, but they want to do it anyway. Great. A Labour source said, we are against the granting of new licences for oil and gas in the North Sea. They will do nothing to cut bills, as the Tories have acknowledged. That's just not true. Change the law. They undermine our energy security. What? Pardon the pun. Gaslighting. Exploiting our own natural gas reserves undermines our energy security. No. No, it wouldn't. And would drive a coach and horse through our climate targets. Yes, please. Please do. Because they're all ginned up anyway because the world's not going to burn. But Labour would continue to use existing oil and gas wells over the coming decades and manage them sustainably as we transform the UK into a clean energy superpower. Now, there is a suggestion that's a bit cynical here because the Scottish really like their wind farms and they obviously want to win SNP seats that have fallen by the wayside since Nicola Sturgeon has gone, so it might be a ploy to do so. But I actually went to the Scottish wind farm Whitley, which is one of the largest inland in Europe, and the wind farm technicians went, yeah, they're just not up to snuff yet, so we do actually need nuclear or gas as a backup. So, yeah. Right, listen to the experts, I suppose. No? Great, we're all going to be poor. Under the Green Prosperity Plan, Labour is aiming to double onshore wind, triple solar, and more than quadruple offshore wind power. Lots of money for the Chinese there. The party is committed to creating a publicly owned renewable energy company, again, internalising all the losses yet to come, you preempted that, whose aim is to achieve net zero carbon power by 2030. 20 years just knocked off the clock with one policy. That's okay, let's do 5-year plans rather than actually go along with the technology, because that's not going to make anyone poor and cold at all, will it? So
this time it's other people.
Yeah.
This time it will, the experiment will work.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, real communism has never been tried, guys. So if we go on to this next one, the Conservatives aren't going to avert course either because Jeremy Hunt has said that he's happy to have a recession to reduce inflation. Again, it's not going to affect him because he's very wealthy and his wife's works for the Chinese Communist Party, so it's almost like he has an interest in destroying the country, but okay. And then he was saying that it's their responsibility to fix it. But he doesn't blame himself, Rishi Sunak, who was the Chancellor, or the Bank of England for creating inflation in the first place. And we know how inflation works thanks to our wonderful colleague Dan's series, Brokenomics, on the website, which for £5 a month, you can get all of our premium content. You can help us keep the lights on because we are demonetized by YouTube if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube as well, come over to the website or Rumble because you get the full podcast for free. You get an extra half an hour after we're done talking in the segments where we interact with the audience and listen to your comments and have a bit of banter back and forth. So you're missing out if you're watching us on the platform that still hates us. But if you do pay £5 a month, you can get excellent content where Dan explains inflation in here. And he says that it's obviously a rate of change metric, so it's relative to the last year. So if they say that you've got 100% inflation this year, and then your bills go up by the same amount in the next year, you've technically only got 50% inflation because it's the same monetary amount, but it's comparative. So you could keep having your bills increase by £100 a year, but they'll still tell you that inflation is going down. Again, major gaslighting. And it's because they're trying to define inflation as price change. But no, that's a symptom of inflation. Inflation is the increase of the money supply proportion to the static supply of goods. When money supply outpaces goods, you get inflation. And what have they done? They've printed loads and loads of money. And they've also been adjusting the interest rates. And if you want to learn about interest rates, you can go on to this next one, which is episode 3. Dan's on loads of Brokenomics stuff. You've got hours of content on our website to pour through, so it's well worth the £5. And so I just wanted to talk about the Bank of England's interest rates just to finish off here, because last week's inflation figure was terrible. Apparently, the headline was it fell from 10.1% to 8.7% in the last year. But this drop was solely caused by April's bumper increase in energy prices being taken out of the annual comparison. They subsidised the energy price with your tax money, then took it out of the stats of the goods that they were comparing. So they were patting themselves on the back saying, haven't we done a great job with inflation? But you're still paying for it anyway. So they're just lying to you. But the core rate of inflation, far from falling back as some had hoped, actually rose from 6.2% to 6.8%. Because, partially, it's food prices, but the calculation here can't be blamed on food prices because they were excluded from the core measure as well. They took food prices out of the calculation and it's still going up. It's so deceptive. This is why you can't really believe anything about the inflation metrics that are being reported, because the Bank of England and the Treasury are just manipulating the amount of goods that are in the basket they're looking at as being inflated. They're just trying to make themselves look better. One problem that this economist and others have highlighted is the bank's apparent complete inattention to the money supply. Another is the excessive emphasis placed on expectations of inflation. This was compounded by the assumption that because the central bank was devoted to maintaining the inflation rate at 2%, 2% would be the rate of inflation that was generally expected. So they're marking their own homework. They're saying, because we're going to reach the goal of 2%, all of our projections are going to be based around us achieving that goal. They never thought they would fall short of the goal. So the forecasting led to failures on policy. Not only did the bank fail to raise interest rates nearly enough, but it also did not raise them fast enough. The boldest move that it ever seems to have contemplated is an increase in interest rates of 0.5% rather than the usual 0.25%. So basically the government just keeps stepping on rakes and then wonder why they've got a headache and then think another rake to step on will cure them of the headache. And we've got to be one paying for the rakes.
The major question here is who pays.
It's always us. And so this is why my question is this just a series of systemic incompetencies making fiscal dominoes fall down until they smack us in the toe? Or is this deliberate sabotage? Either way, I love living in a communist country.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content on the website, such as the Epoch series, this episode on the life of Lenin. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.